On this week's episode of 90 Degrees, it's the British Open. So, what type of golfers do well here? The difference in betting media between touting versus teaching, and a guy you've probably never heard of could one day become the face of golf. That and more on today's episode of the 90 Degrees podcast. Welcome to the 90 Degrees podcast, where we take an inside look at the sports betting industry. If you can't tell by everyone's excitement on social media, it's British Open week in the PGA Tour, and I wanted to talk a little golf. That's why I'm happy to be joined by today's guest, Spencer Aguiar, pro bettor, senior PGA analyst for Rotoballer, co-host of the Better Golf Pod, and award-winning golf writer. Spencer, thanks for joining me.
I really appreciate you having me on. I think a show like yours is incredibly important to the growth of this industry. Way too much of the content that gets released into the ether is extremely tout centric in its approach. We can obviously discuss my background more as the show goes on, but I essentially got into the content creation side of the space in 2018. One of the things I've always preached, which is what you do on your show from day one here, is that while I will give you my thought process, I'll give you an in-depth answer into why I'm making a play. My model has always been that I'm here to teach, not tout. I'm a really big believer that someone's ability to sustain long-term growth with their bankroll always is going to stem from their capacity to find value before a number moves. We're talking really thin margins that are getting even tighter in the world of golf. The increased hold percentages in some of these markets have been wild. It's why I have my model that I released to provide some semblance of help for anyone out there if you want to land on some iteration of what you think of this board. But I think what you're doing with your podcast is everything that's right in the sports betting world, man.
I appreciate it. And, buttering the host will get you everywhere in this business. I actually, the first thing that I notice about you, Spencer, is you look very young. And golf tends to be an older generation viewership sport. How old are you when you start getting into watching golf?
Do you want to take a guess on how old I am right now?
Let's two baby faces guessing their age. I'm gonna say, just based on that, I'm gonna say you're in your late 20s.
I am 33.
Okay, I'm 36, and we're just bragging about how young we look. But were you young starting golf, or you didn't get into golf later in life?
I got a late start into golf. I don't play the sport. I've always viewed that as a good thing because I don't carry any of those preconceived notions. But it became something that I started building a model for in handicapping around 2011. We were talking very quickly before we went on air, and it looks like you have Scotty Wynn, Daniel Negreanu, Phil Locke. I'm sure there's a ton more that I'm missing from that list there of the bobbleheads in the back. But I essentially played poker semi-professionally through high school and college. I did that throughout the poker boom until Black Friday hit in 2011. I tried to transition to live poker since I had just turned 21 at the end of 2010. I thought that was going to be my path I wanted to take in life, but it didn't really take me that long to realize that lifestyle wasn't going to be for me. It was one thing when I was behind an avatar on the computer and didn't have to take money from someone face to face. It's another when I saw how it affected them. And I'm born and raised in Vegas. I'm very data intensive in everything that I do. I think sports betting was a really nice pivot point for me to look into at that point. It's something that I had been doing far longer than I should have been by the time I was 21 at that point. So it was a really nice situation for me to where sports betting was the natural pivot. And I was handicapping all sports when I started this, and we can talk more about the golf and how I made the transition there. But since you do have those poker bobbleheads in the background, I will bring up this story very quickly because I think you'll get a kick out of it. One of my really good family friends was the late great Chip Reese, who I'm sure you are aware of.
Legend. I might have his bobblehead. I can't recall. There's a couple hiding just around the corner there.
I mean, if you ever are selling it, you could put the most outrageous price. I will pay you for that bobblehead.
I'm gonna look after the pod because I'm also a businessman.
For those that don't know, Chip's one of, if not the greatest poker players of all time. We used to travel with him on his private jet to Montana. We would stay in his home when we would vacation. You'd have Doyle Brunson, Huckseed, anyone else from that era that would be around. I've always been around this world, even when I didn't realize what was going on at like the age of 6. And I might be the only person in the world that can give this story of how they won their first bet. But the first wager I ever won, we were sitting around the campfire. I'm probably 6 or 7 years old at this point, and Chip's son name was Casey. He unfortunately passed a handful of years ago himself, but he bet me that I couldn't eat a certain amount of marshmallows. I probably ended up being the real loser in this bet at the end of the day because I ate the number of marshmallows that I needed, made me sick afterwards. But he went, grabbed the money from Chip, paid me the money. So the first wager I ever won actually ended up netting me profit from Chippery. So I think that when that's your answer that you can give, it's kind of just destiny that you're meant to be in this sports betting world.
Sure, and you're like you're Las Vegas born and raised, and I'm like, it's almost got to be like a rite of passage in that city. Like you can't ignore it, right? Gambling is what built this city, and let's not pretend that that's what it wasn't. So you're saying right from young you had influences in the whole gambling atmosphere.
Exactly. Like when I was in middle school, so this would be 12 or 13. It's another Chip story here. I'm sitting in there, student aid for the office in there. Chip comes in. We're playing blackjack. Chip taps me on the shoulder and he's like, "Are you winning?" Like it's just a normal thing in Las Vegas that Chip walks into school, into a middle school, and it's, "Hey, Spencer, are you winning today?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm up." And he's like, "Oh, well, continue what you're doing right now." So Vegas is a very interesting town. It gets a bad stigma in a lot of ways with it, and I think most people are good. You obviously have some that are what gives the bad light to it, and I think in our space in general, and this is why I said I believe your show is so great. There are so many people out there that are in here just to make a quick dollar and to provide things that are not tangible for long-term success. And that was what was so important for me when I started, is I never wanted to be that person that is touting plays and trying to give this information. Like obviously, like I said at the beginning, if I give a play and I give you the information, that's great. But I want a person to always be able to build their own numbers, their own model, to figure out their own answers. If you want to ask ideas and you want to get better on how to do all those things, that's wonderful. But numbers move quickly. Books have different prices, specifically in the golf world here, with different matchups and things like that. And it is very important that everybody out there, like, we all do it for different reasons. I do it for a professional reason. There's people out there that do it for fun, but no matter what your answer is, you want to try to be making money with it. And the more information that you can provide for the general public and the better people can get, I think the space grows more naturally that way. So that's always been my mentality behind it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like anybody who tells you going to the casino and losing a few $100s is fun is lying. Going and winning some money is always the fun part. I want to talk to you about what goes into a golf model, but you said something a little bit earlier about you tried betting a lot of different sports and then eventually you decide to refine yourself into golf. Were you good at betting other sports, or were you bad and then you found yourself betting golf?
No, I was good at everything. I mean, I built a model throughout the board, but I think golf was really interesting. So my life is different now than when I initially got into the space. Like you said, I was handicapping everything when I started. The volume and the need to find every minimal edge my model would pinpoint was very important. That changed for me in 2019 when I began to make more of a name for myself in this golf industry. And a lot of times, the best markets are going to be your niche markets here. You look
Yeah.
at a Sunday NFL slate, something as small as a half point or a full point in deviation, that might be your most significant edge if it crosses through a key number. For
Yeah.
golf, the markets were so weak every single event that, landing 60% plus throughout the year on head to head wagers wouldn't have been uncommon practice. I think books didn't understand the need to switch pricing to land on these course specific blueprints. They would throw out these automated numbers for each player weekly where they never really deviated to account for skill set changes or course divergences that would come into play. I would say it's probably equivalent to football, I guess, where let's say the Kansas City Chiefs were playing, they would be favored by the same total weekly, even if Mahomes wasn't the one taking snaps, or the team that they're playing is better or worse than the week before. It's like that's almost how the golf world was, just because it was. We won't use Tiger Woods because I guess Tiger Woods is at a different level, but just because it was Dustin Johnson, like there are courses that Dustin Johnson's going to be better on than other venues, and books were just releasing these very static blueprints out into the space where like every single time this player is going to be priced around this range. And it was a really simple market to take advantage of for a long time. I think that's changed exponentially this season. I don't necessarily believe it lands under that niche market expectation anymore, but there's still a significant edge. You just probably have to be a little bit more selective than usual. I talked about the increased hold percentages in all sectors. That's something that has been really hit hard in the golf world here. But I think if you shop around enough, you can always find those mistakes.
Yeah, and you want to talk about if a sports book's confident or not. Our sponsor Pinnacle. If you want to go bet six figures on a football game, they'll give it to you on Sunday
They're
morning,
elite.
right? And then, but golf, you might get a couple thousand in a matchup if you're lucky. So it should tell you where the sports books are most confident. Let's talk about modeling golf because I don't bet golf, and I don't like to bet sports that I don't do well in or I don't win in. What goes into like a model? Like, is the first thing you're considering the course? Is that
Yes.
where? So, all right, we get course specific, and then like without giving away the whole recipe, what are some things that you have to attribute for to build a golf model?
Yeah, so it's always course specific for me. Like we're in Europe now, so a test in Europe may favor scrambling, some of those other par saving metrics. That means we would want players who can salvage a score during those tournaments. Conversely, some of these wide open American tracks, they might end up accentuating distance or birdie making skills. I think it's really difficult question to answer in a vacuum situation since no two models are going to be built exactly the same way. Everything I do is always extrapolated to predict outcomes for the event in front of the players that week. I never go into a contest with a bias that a particular metric must be weighed into the mix. It's always something where I take the long-term strokes gain data from a course historically. I mathematically recreate that model to fit the test that's in front of the players. I think if you do it any other way, that you're just creating flawed numbers, and that is what we're trying to avoid here. But a lot of what I do to, I guess, answer your question is I will look at the last 5 years of the track. I will look at the top 10, 20, 30, 40 on the leaderboard. How did they gain their strokes? What was the dispersion of scoring like between your four critical metrics of off the tee, approach, around the green, putting? Is it a venue where players are making birdies in bunches? If it is it wide open enough that if you look at comp corollary courses, can you find an edge that way? Is it a venue where three putt percentage? In Europe, you have these really large greens. You have these wide open conditions where you don't have the protection that you would have on some of these tracks in Europe, where you're on the coast, you have this wind that's going to come into play. You have to worry about three putt percentage on these wide open greens. So I'm always starting from scratch on every build. Like, I think for this might be a different answer than some people would give. Like, I am much more of a person that does everything by hand. Like, I'm not automating anything inside of my sheet. Like, every single change and move that gets done, I am the one that's implementing it onto it. So I never take the cookie cutter easy way out of this is my power rating on a player, or this is what I think a fair price is in general. It's always going to be that course specific answer that's going to push me in that area tournament to tournament.
Hey, I want to talk to you about Pinnacle. Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sports book and available to bettors in Ontario. Find out what professional bettors have known for decades. Pinnacle is where the best bettors play. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. Please play responsibly. Not available in the US. Okay, how important is form? Like, because you say you look at 5 years worth of data, but here's the thing about golf: when a guy is on, like Rory, he's very hard to beat when he's playing his A game, and then he'll go 12 months, 15 months of not being on his A game. How much do you weigh form versus 5 years of data?
I would say for me, so the three ways that I break it down would be form, course history, and a statistical profile. The statistical profile for me will always make up somewhere between 50 to 60 to 65% of my weight. That's where the majority is going to come into play. Form for me is more of that 20, 25, 30%. So I am looking at, and form to me is I run it in a weighted sense, but I will pull up the last 10 tournaments that have been played. It doesn't mean that player's last 10 tournaments, just the last 10 weeks of events. I will recalculate those numbers into how I think it should be fit there based off of if I want to run it a little bit more limited sample size or if I want to run it more of those 10 tournaments. And then the course history one is the intriguing answer to it because I think people massively overweight course history. There are tournaments where it's indicative. I think if you look at an event like the Masters, so if you look at Augusta National, that's a course that's highly predictive, probably the most predictive of any venue that you can find. I will amp up some of those weights there. But I think in general, and that's something that is out there in the public eye. And I think once sports books have an idea of course history and current form and some of these other things, like it's harder to find value that way. I do think current form matters, but I'm more so looking for the golfers where the value shows in my model to where the form is there enough where it's pushed them up the sheet, but maybe not necessarily to the point where the sports book has caught up to what is happening.
Got it. And uh it's is it safe to say it's not just math, there's also a lot of instinct and feel to what you're doing, because deciding which tournaments to ramp up a little bit more of history, like that's the art of building a model, right?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. I am somebody who does live and die by my model. If I don't have value, there is nobody in the world, whichever person that you respect out there. Like, unfortunately, like they couldn't convince me to go against what my model says. But it does come down to the ability to. I guess it's very mathematical for me to answer that first part of the question. So I am using a lot of math there. Um,
I meant the weights, right? Because it's what the number that spits out. Okay, you can say that's the number that I'm going to go with. That's my my holy Jesus number. But it's the weights of how you weight your model and what is important. Like that's where the art of building a model comes in, right? Deciding what is the most important and how much of an impact it should have on the final number.
I think that's a fair way to say it. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where I am very hands on with every single move that gets made. And there's every single percentage that is placed in any single spot. There's rhyme and reason from a mathematical answer of why I'm doing it. But um, yeah, I mean, my exact science of it is not going to be the same exact science that Better X is going to be putting out there with the way that he's building it. And I think that's where you can get your edges is when you're able to create numbers. And obviously the more books that you have at your disposal, the better it's going to be there with it. But you're always trying to find a mathematical edge at the end of the day with it.
Okay, let's talk about all the markets you can bet in golf, because there's a ton. There's like outrights, top 5, 10, 20, head to head, make miss cut, or like just under over a score round. What are some, like, what does your gambling portfolio look like on any given tournament?
I think the two big mistakes people make in golf betting would be one, they have terrible bankroll management. That probably goes for all sports. I don't think that's a golf specific thing.
Yeah.
And then two, they have way too much exposure in the outright market. I know everybody wants to hit that long shot wager, but a proper betting portfolio should always be built with the majority of your exposure in those higher win percentage or lower hold areas. That's going to be the pre and in tournament matchups as the majority of my cards. I like the top 40 market inside the placement board. The hold percentages there have been increasing, but pricing is still generally soft. And then I guess just to go back to the head to head point, one of my strategies has always been finding fade candidates over a golfer that I'm strictly looking to back. It gives you multiple opportunities to win the wager when you can take on a golfer that your model dislikes with a
Yeah.
player that is grading profitably against them. Like to me, probably the biggest answer would be miscut equity. I think that's the largest opportunity that you can seize in those matchups weekly. There's not necessarily a quota that I'm trying to hit. Of a difference of I need this percent in matchups, I need this percent in placements, I need this percent in outrights. I will say that I don't like to be more than a unit in outrights for the week, and I think that's even pushing a lot of ways. Like I bet a unit to win around 8 units, somewhere between like depending on where the value is 7 to 12, I say would be like the core of where I'm landing there. But I think people go egregious with that answer to where if you look at their portfolio for the week, half of their money is tied up in futures. And one of the problems that comes to that, even beyond anything else, and this is the answer that I always give people, is golf is a really difficult sport to hedge. Like you have cash out options, sure, but I am not a believer in hedging. You start taking your equity off the board once you're doing that. And I always tell people that if you're hedging in these future spots, you are betting way more money than you probably should be in these situations. Like you might want to reevaluate your outright portfolio in those situations. And by just doing that, if all of a sudden people have less exposure in the outright market and you put more of that money and more of that exposure that you want into matchups, I guarantee you're going to see your ROI increase as you get better with it. You just want to become more and more profitable with that answer. But the people that are living and dying by outrights, you can go cold for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and you can't withstand that. And that is what we're trying not to do. We want sustainable growth, not this.
Sure.
I hit one week and I lose the next 10.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right. I've heard like time of day that you tee off can be important based on obviously what the weather looks like later in the day, and then you also have the turnaround where you got to bet right away, where you got to play on Friday right in the morning. Is that a huge part of your handicapping process, looking at time of day or even the weather?
Not necessarily for me. I'm not as big on the weather as most people. It's going to matter a lot more for tournaments like the Open Championship when you look into the lack of protection that I've talked about previously. Like, yeah, your American courses probably tend to be more tree lined and less exposed to coastal gusts. It doesn't mean that you don't have some that are brutal when you play in various spots in the country, but I've always viewed it as a situation where once the books know the weather edge, it's already overinflated and reflected the numbers to begin with. And it goes back to kind of this answer that I gave for current form or course history with it. Weather is very fickle. And I think when you have a fickle answer that comes into play, like trying to think the best way to give this answer where it makes logical sense. Like where if you thought you had a perceived edge one way, it can just as quickly become the wrong side of the draw if something changes or things get worse weather-wise where it forces a round to be suspended. I worry that people sometimes build models that are so highlighted to where, yeah, the PM AM wave is clearly the wave you want to be on. And none of us are meteorologists. Look, we can look at a wind finder, we can try to figure it out. I think it works well for individual round matchups, obviously. I think it works well for showdown contests for DFS. I think those two things, yes, you want to look for as short of a time frame as you can, but when we're building out for 4 days of a tournament, a lot can change between the start of the event on Thursday and then when somebody's teeing off on Friday. And that's not even taking into account the Saturday and Sunday rounds. And you sometimes get tournaments, and it's probably more prevalent in Europe once again, where you'll tee off on Sunday and the afternoon guys, which are the guys in the lead, will be 40, 50 mile per hour winds and they're going to get blown off the course. And it's like, well, you wanted your guy near the top. If you could have promised that they were one of the leaders, you would have taken it at the time. So I think it's one of those things that people overweigh in models. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but I build it one time before the event and I pretty much leave it there unless we're talking about individual bets on like a round one matchup or whatever it ends up being.
What I like about golf is, it's almost like four separate betting events because Thursday happens and then, all right, I've got new data and also I've got new lineups based on new spreads. Is it so busy where it's like, all right, Thursday's a wrap and now you're like, okay, I got to get ready for Friday. I got to look at the new numbers and input this new data. Like there's four separate unique betting events in one tournament, right?
I pretty much work 24/7. I think to be a good sports bettor in general, you need to be on top of the numbers. And as you said with golf, it is broken down into where you have multiple occurrences. And even if you want to take it a step further, there's five because there's the pre-tournament stuff that you're going to talk about before any of the rounds even come into play with it. And there's the ability to find edges here and there. And I think one of the things people do when they build a model, which is one of the things I've been trying to push, is the in tournament data clearly matters, but it needs to be slowly infused into your model. Somebody will build a model from a pre-tournament perspective and you had all these reasons, and yeah, maybe you were wrong and you need to make slight deviations to account for it, and you want to put in the new stats that you have. But I've seen one of the common mistakes people make is that you'll build your model from pre-event. You'll land with, let's say, Rory number one on the model. Rory goes and plays day one, and let's just say his ball striking is terrible, and ball striking is what you care about for round two. And I've seen people put such an egregious amount of weight on that round one ball striking that all of a sudden now Rory is an underdog in your model to every single person out there in the space. And it's like, well, pump the brakes a little bit. It's one round. There's a reason why you're trying to build out for extended data. One round or one tournament even shouldn't be causing these massive differences to take place. So I think the in-tournament bets are probably where the biggest edge does come into play. I would say that's where the books have not quite caught up. They've gotten a lot better there, but I would still say that if doing that correctly, I don't see a reason why you couldn't be pushing 58% plus on your head-to-head matchups. There's very big errors that are coming into play where I will find numbers here and there that are off by 40, 50, 60, 70 points from where they should be. It's just I think it just comes down to knowing what you're looking for, though, at the end of the day with it.
All right, I've heard of this being an edge, and I want to know if you've ever explored it, where a golfer is doing really well, like just let's call him an unknown or playing way above his level, and a lot of people, because there's betting opportunities throughout the year to bet the four majors, even months in advance. A lot of people will bet that golfer that's hot in some future majors because the books have not adjusted. These are pre-tournament prices, and knowing that like by the time the tournament tees off, this guy's going to be half the price that he was once upon a time. Is that something that you've ever done?
Yeah, futures markets for these majors, that's the one nice thing about them is they're up year round. So I am running data throughout the entire year. And, I have a special Masters US Open Championship, PGA Championship model where I will update it throughout the year. I will see where I have a proper price based off of these players. And every Sunday night, I will go in from the tournament before. I will update my data moving forward with it. And I will have what I have a proper price to be at that time. So, I think there are a lot of edges to be found where futures betting is tough because of the whole percentages that I've talked about. If you can find mistakes in the market that have not been accounted for or what you believe to be a mistake, and sometimes it comes with the answer that you just talked about, where there's a player that is currently in form. Maybe he's won the golf tournament and he's sitting there for the Open Championship at 100 to 1, even though your model thinks he should be 40 to 1. And the book hasn't accounted for like the upside that he's actually presenting. So I think it's something that people should be doing anytime that you can get look ahead markets, specifically if you're betting outrights here, you want to be looking at that.
All right, let's talk about recreational money in golf. Because here's the thing. I've got buddies who bet golf, but here's all they bet are the four majors. That's it. Everybody wants to bet majors because of it, we know that the more bets the book takes, the better informed their number is. Are there bigger edges in smaller tournaments as opposed to these majors that are so sharp based on how much money is flowing in?
There's a massive difference. Like, I'll take it even a step further than what you said. There's a larger edge in these non-elevated events because of that same reason. If you could give me a substantial enough data size on every single player in the field, I would rather bet, let's say, high school golf, just because I would be able to find an edge. Like the liquidity in the market and the massive big that they're going to take up front in many of these majors, it's just not going to produce the best betting boards. There's going to be certain books for the Open Championship where their hold percentage, now that we've gotten into the week of the tournament, you might have them up in the 170% range. Like, that's absurd. The matchups typically become infinitely worse also for these majors. My advice always is have as many books at your disposal as possible. That's an answer that you would also give if you were betting any other sport. But the one big difference, and I alluded to it a second ago, is that shops are going to offer different head-to-head matchups between different places here. They do that for all events. It's not a major championship thing. It just always becomes a situation where you're trying to pick off your random edges here and there with matchups varying from shop to shop. Like, obviously, majors get the clickbait headline when you're able to hit something. I hit Wyndham Clark at 100 to 1 during the US Open. That's all anybody wanted to talk about that week. Wasn't one of my best gambling tournaments I've ever had before. The matchup markets went south. The placement bets weren't that great. I had a lot of exposure to Wyndham Clark, and it gave me a profitable tournament. And that's the clickbait headline that always comes is, oh, Spencer hit Wyndham Clark 100 to 1 at the US Open. But, I think these bottom of the barrel tournaments will always be better than these majors if we're talking solely about value at the end of the day.
Hey, the easiest way to improve as a sports bettor is use multiple sports books and always get the best odds. We recommend using an odds comparison tool like BetStamp. BetStamp compares odds across every sports book for games, futures, and player props. Save time and money by checking BetStamp before you bet. Download the app today. If you're looking to sign up for a new sportsbook account, please check out the offers available at betstamp.app/circles off or hit the link in the description. If you sign up through this page, it helps support the show. Now back to the rest of the episode. All right, it's major week, but I want to know of the four majors, do you have a favorite to watch and also a favorite to bet on?
Probably is the same answer for me. I would say the U.S. Open. I would expect most to say the Masters. I think that's the common consensus. If you were to poll 100 people, you probably get the majority that would say the Masters. Historically, I've gotten crushed at Augusta. It almost translates into the biggest loss I take every single year. Don't know why that reason necessarily is. It's the one tournament of the four that plays at the same venue. You would think that would help me, even if we're talking about a more difficult major championship market for all the reasons I just talked about a second ago. But that has been a difficult one. The Open Championship, that's probably hard to fully appreciate just because we're in the United States. There's the time zone change. PGA Championships never quite done it for me. And then I just like the rotation for the US Open. You always get this similar blueprint that you can find on the players, even if the courses are changing yearly. To me, that is the most true quality of golf that you can find. And I mean, I guess naturally, based off of money here, that's been the one I've been most successful at. So whether or not that's the reason I give it, that's maybe for a different podcast here. But I think US Opens are fun.
All right, I'm an agent of chaos. Okay, I love St. Andrews. Give me the British Open, and I'm gonna tell you, like, take it one further. I don't bet golf, but I will bet something so that I can watch the tournament. And rather than bet one of the smart golfers that are more steady, I love jumping on the Jordan Spieth roller coaster. There's nothing like it in sports. The highs are super high, and the lows are insane, and that's what I like to do. Tell us about the British Open because it's this week. What is the tournament about? What kind of golfers excel at something like this?
I want to touch on the Jordan Spieth thing very quickly before we move on. So I'm not going to give a dollar amount to this, but the biggest swing I have ever encountered in my sports betting life came during the 2015 US Open. So I guess this would be a negative answer about the US Open. That's at Chambers Bay. I had Dustin Johnson, and I don't know if you remember that tournament. Dustin had like 7 feet to win the tournament for Eagle on the final hole, missed the putt, and then had a couple feet coming back to force it into a playoff against Spieth, missed that putt. I had so much exposure to Dustin Johnson in any iteration of any market that you can talk about, including for DFS contests, that was one of the most painful things. So unfortunately, I don't know if I share the same love of Jordan Spieth for that reason. He caused me a lot of pain there. But if we're talking specifically about the Open Championship, there's a lot of differences of that venue that you would find there that you wouldn't get elsewhere. Obviously, the time zone change, that's at least something worth noting. There's that lack of protection from the wind on these link style courses. You typically get these large green complexes where off the tee prowess needed gets reduced because of the strategic nature. When you mix that with the short game returns, all of that kind of gives you this unique skill set requirement. I do think weather always becomes the most significant factor of any of the four majors that we're talking about. It makes it harder because certain waves have had the propensity historically to just get blown off the course. And it kind of goes like if you like Jordan Spieth and you like mayhem, the Open Championship is exactly where you find that chaos with it. And I think Jordan Spieth is a really good fit for an Open Championship for all those reasons. Like you want players that can scramble. You want the ability to try to maneuver through these courses. Now, I don't know how much I trust Jordan Spieth's putter at this point. Like every single tournament, it seems like we're watching him miss from 2 feet. And I guess that's the roller coaster ride that you alluded to, that you just never know quite what you're going to get. It's one shot, he's dangling off the edge and he might fall over the cliff at Pebble Beach. The next second, he's like hitting the most miraculous shot you've ever seen falling down. And then, he's missing putts from like an inch in. So, opens are challenging though because of the weather. I always worry a little bit just that you need as much information as you can with the weather in these tournaments. And as I said, I'm not a person that is so looking to find weather edges that you have to make a little few changes and be cognizant at least of what the disparity comes into play at an Open Championship with that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And as far as the speed stuff goes, some people get their adrenaline jumping out of airplanes and skydiving, and some people like to, drag race. And I like to get my adrenaline rush by betting on Jordan Spieth on the major weekend. That's how I get my fill. Okay, do you have without like I'm not asking you for picks, but are there one or two golfers that you have an elevated interest in this weekend? It could be for a high or a low reason that you say to yourself, you know what? I think these are two intriguing names to watch out for this weekend at the British Open. It could be for the good or for the bad.
I guess I'm a masochist with some of these players that every single week my model seems to have value on the Xander Schauffele's, Patrick Cantlay's, Max Homa's. I do think that because it is not held on US soil, you are going to see a drift in the market on all of those players. Um, I've always said that if you can find Cantlay and Schauffele in particular at 25 to 1 or higher, which at the time of recording this, there are still numbers out there where you can find those prices. I've always said that that's too high. They very, there, you'd have to find a very wrong course fit for them to start drifting past that number for me. And open championships are really good for them. Like we can talk about why some Americans don't find success. Those two do because of their short games, because of their Schauffele in particular, and Max Homa too. Like those two golfers, you look at strokes gained off the tee. There's US Opens where you can just bludgeon the ball off the tee, and some of these guys take a negative effect. Cantlay's a great driver of the ball. I'm not going to include him into this mix. But when you look at an Open Championship, because we're talking about strategy off the tee, and you have these fast, firm fairways where the balls can roll off forever, there's always a decrease in dispersion of scoring off the tee. It's why you get some of these European golfers that are really crafty with their short games. Think of a Cameron Smith, for example. He won the Open Championship last year. He's as erratic off the tee as possible, but the ability to be able to club down, he gets to roll out. The short game is immaculate. The putter is as great as it can be. That's the skill set I'm looking for is can you find me the golfer that is able to take advantage of certain faculties of their game that maybe they wouldn't necessarily have in a different major here? And I think Cantlay and Xander are two golfers that kind of stick out to me there. Uh, Tyrrell Hatton, if you're looking for a European name, Max Homa is 60 to 1 in the market at this point right now. Depending on how he finishes in the Scottish Open, we'll see where that number goes. But yeah, it's an interesting board with some of these Americans that I think might drift a little bit too far.
All right. I remember where I was when I heard the news that golf and live, the PGA Tour and live merged. And what was the most shocking about it was we never even heard a whisper of it. Like it kind of like, bang, here's the news, absorb it. Nobody knew what it meant because it was so, it had to trickle out slowly. Do you have any strong thoughts about what happened with the live split and the merger?
Not really. It's obviously unfortunate that it initially split up the best players in the world. You would prefer to see the best playing the best when possible. Everyone's going to have their own reasons for why they either left or stayed. I'm not going to be one that's going to judge them for whatever decision that they deem to be best for themselves and their families. I do hope that as time moves forward that we do get some more clarity here. It's still kind of wide open right now to where you have these Senate hearings and we'll see if they pass the bill to where this can move forward with it and these two tours can merge. But it's challenging right now. It took a lot of the steam that golf had, and that's also one of the reasons, I guess, to like backtrack to one of the first questions that you even asked me here. I stopped all sports, one, because of the niche market thing of what I was covering from a content creation standpoint. But I think there's a really big ceiling for golf. And it goes to your answer that you gave of you can split this into every single day as its own separate entity here. And when you look specifically at the content that I am creating over at Rotoballer, football is king. Like you're not going to beat football in this country. That's understandable. Baseball would be second for the site. Golf is the third biggest driver on the Rotoballer website. We surpassed NBA. We surpassed any of your mixed martial arts sports. I think that upside is what's really intrigued me when I decided to make that move. And a lot of the wind got taken out of the sail, unfortunately, when these players got split up. You never want to say, I can't watch Dustin Johnson or I can't
Yeah.
watch Brooks Koepka play. And it was very unfortunate. And I have a bad feeling that golf continues to step in their own way through every single turn that we make here. And we can't have that if we want to continue growing that sport to where, like I said, we're not going to get to football or baseball, but I think there's a realistic possibility that we can push this further up where there's more eyeballs. And as gambling becomes legalized in more states throughout the country and as everybody has it, it's kind of that easy fill in market when football season's off. Golf just runs year round. There's really no off time with it. And when I said I work 24/7, like I legitimately work 24/7 from January to the end of the year. Like you have 2 weeks at the end of the season, but it's pretty much start and go. And every single week that if you want action and you want the ability to try to get an edge and you want the ability to gamble on these sports, golf is the perfect fit there.
One of the intrigues I think with golf is people like to bet tournaments, right? It's the big reason why March Madness is so successful. People love betting in the playoffs. People do playoff brackets. It's that whole finality, right? We're gonna get a winner. Whereas sometimes regular seasons can feel drawn out, like it's just one out of 82 games, and it's not as meaningful. And the one thing that golf captures is every weekend is a tournament, is its own tournament to bet, and you're betting within the tournament, and you're going to experience it as a tournament as a whole. And I think that's part of the intrigue that golf provides that other sports don't. Sticking with the live thing for 1 second, because there's a lot of great golfers that never crossed over. Guys like Tiger Woods and the rumored $1 billion offer that he got, and Rory McIlroy, who's been a vocal critic, and even he said on the first day of the Scottish Open that if live golf was the only option to ever play again, he would retire. John Rahm was another, and Jordan Spieth, and some of the bigger names, Scotty Scheffler. Um, am I cynical in thinking that there was some sort of financial arrangement? Because I can't believe that they would let Dustin Johnson make 400 million and Phil Mickelson make 600 million, and then they get nothing, and now they're back playing in the same tournaments again. It almost feels like they had to have been made whole in order for this to all move forward. Do you share my cynicism or my thought process there?
I think from day one, there's been a lot more that has happened that the public probably doesn't know about. I would imagine even from the start of this, and we've heard this during some of the Senate meetings, like they were talking about Tiger and Rory owning ownership stake in some of these live golf teams. I'm not a believer that just overnight, all of a sudden, Rory didn't know what was going on, or Tiger didn't necessarily know what was going on. And it's like, oh, now we've made the merger. Maybe they didn't know at that exact second when it happened. And yeah, it might have been an overnight deal, but there's been a lot of these back alley sort of conversations that have been had. We're obviously speculating on exactly what would have happened to make this okay. And maybe we don't have an answer to that yet. I mean, we haven't seen the live players back. I mean, they're not legally allowed to come back yet until we pass everything through, but um we haven't necessarily seen that answer to what is going on and if there's going to be a suspension that ends up looming, or maybe we do find out, like, things don't stay secret usually. Like usually somebody tattletales and slips some information out there, and all of a sudden you hear that Rory got X amount of dollars to make this okay, and all the players split X amount of the pie to make sure everybody was happy here. I would assume there's going to be something like that that is going to go on, or has already gone on. But as I said, it's all speculation at this point. But I would lean. We're both betting men here. I would push the line in the favor that
Yeah.
much more in the favor that something has happened.
All right. You mentioned Wyndham Clark, and 6 months ago, a lot of people wouldn't have known who Wyndham Clark is, and I'm talking about casuals. And then when you win the U.S. Open, you become known. And you also mentioned Cameron Smith, and casuals would not have known about the great golfer with a mullet, but he eventually became a household name. Is there any golfers right now that you think the casual viewer doesn't know about, or isn't fully familiar with, that you think in the next year or two is going to start popping up and making an impact on the majors?
How gross do you want to get with this answer? Because I mean, I can give the cherry picked answer that
I want gross. Like, I don't want Will Zalatoris, who I think is like borderline. I think casuals kind of know him because he's, had some top 10 finish. I want to know a guy that I've never heard of that I think you're making up the name and pulling the wool over my eyes. That's what I want to know.
Okay, perfect. So, and unfortunately, I wish we would have done this show before the U.S. Open. I would have given you the Wyndham Clark answer there. He was ready to just boom through the space, and I think that that's something that's going to stay. And like, if I was going to give you just some casual, basic answer, Tom Kim, Cameron Young, those are two players that are kind of already made runs with Cameron Young. Like he's come in second a couple times. But no, let's get really gross with this. Like I'll try to think of players that are outside the top 100 right now you know what? Let me bring up my model. I can tell you on my model who some of the biggest deviations from official world golf ranking would be to the players that where I have them. So let me sort this really fast. All right, so I think a guy like Steven Yeager, he has a really intriguing skill set if he can clean up with the putter. He's outside the top 100 in the world currently. He grades as a top 30 golfer in the world for me. Ludwig Aberg, he is fresh out of college. I think he's one of the best prospects I've seen in years. I don't know if he starts competing to win a major in a year or whatever the time frame you said there was, but the sky is going to be the limit for him. I guess these two would be more under an look. I mean, I think if you're following golf every week, obviously you're going to know these two players. This may not be a common name for some people out there, but Sahith Theegala, Minwoo Lee, those are two players with very big upsides in my model for what the potential that they have. And then the last name I'll give is I'll say Alex Smalley. We've seen a recent surge from him where he's gotten himself into the top 70 of the world. I love his ball striking ability. The one thing I worry about is his ability to score on par fives on some of these more challenging tracks. If he can't do that, he never takes that next step. But like the Jaeger answer, he's a top 30 player in the world for me inside my model, and that's always something that's important when I'm looking for some of these guys in the future.
All right, you gave me 5 names. I'm a casual viewer, so I'm your perfect audience. I knew 2 of them. I knew Minwoo Lee and I knew Thagala just because there's just this weird thing where, like, we're watching the 4th round of a golf tournament and, just hovering around that top 12, top 15 and putting in solid performances, but I didn't know 60% of the names that you named, so I think you hit the nail on the head as far as the diving deep and getting ugly about some names we wouldn't know. I want to ask one last question. Tiger has been the face of golf for as long as he's been around, and now it's become like a special event whenever he does play. Um, we had a little period over the last little while where like Spieth had a run and Rory had a run and John Rahm and seems like Scotty Scheffler's on his run right now, but no one has like had a sustained run on top for like a long stretch. With the competition being like so more robust, it's like it feels like there's like 15, 20 really good golfers now. Is the era of one golfer dominating for a decade over? If not, is there anyone that's in today's game that you think has a shot of at least having a run, like a 5-year run where they're really at the top of their game and they can knock off 5, 6 majors in a 5-year span?
If somebody's going to do it, and this is kind of a cop out answer because he's number one in the world, probably Scotty Scheffler. What he is doing this season is historic. We're talking Tiger Woods esque ball striking numbers. If you take the difference in my model with the way that I run my tee to green stats, and you compare him, who's number one, to I believe Rory, who's number two for me, there's like as large of a difference there from if you move from Rory to a guy like Brendan Steele in my model. And that's going to be a name that, some people who don't follow golf won't even know who that is. And that's the point that I'm trying to make here. It's that Scotty's ball striking, if he would just make putts, and the putter has gone ice cold, I don't even think he's a bad putter, but he's been one of the worst putters in the world now for the last 6 months. And that's why he's not winning golf tournaments. You see him inside the top 5 on every single leaderboard. He's putting the Tiger Woods stats together. Just unfortunately, that part of his game with the putter has held him back. But it's very sad because I truly believe that if you would have given him a baseline version of his putter that we had gotten from, 2 years ago or a year ago, I think he could have won 2 majors this year already. And it's unfortunate that we haven't seen that high end upside from him to where he's winning some of these events, but I don't think he's going to go anywhere. You can't strike the ball like he does and not keep yourself up there. And then I mean, if you're just looking for an absolute wild card that, you say in 3 years that this guy's the number one player in the world and has taken over golf, I'll point back to that Ludwig Aberg answer that I gave. I think he is the last prospect that got me this excited would have been John Rahm when he came out of Arizona State. I think he is that level of good to where we look at this in 2, 3 years, and not only is he a top 10 player, but he's pushing to be the number one player in the world. When you have the distance that he has, he's going to have to clean up some of this inability that he has with his putter and his short game. And if you can't tell, I'm the type of person that I want to find ball strikers. I'll live with the putter. I like it is what it is with it. Obviously, you need to make putts to win golf tournaments, but find me the pristine ball strikers that can do that week in and week out, just because putting is such a volatile statistic day to day with it, that if I can find these guys that do have that plus prerequisite for distance and then have the ability to score at a level that my model is pumping it out, that really like the top players aren't even comparing to, I'd say Scheffler is the one that grades there right now. And then, yeah, Ludwig, let's see where he's at in a year or two, because I think he could be very special.
All right, I'm going to be, I've already forgotten his last name, but I will never forget his first name, and that's going to be somebody I'm looking out for. I had a buddy who said, Scotty Scheffler is the oldest 26-year-old in the world, and he goes, he lacks the sizzle. Like, Tiger obviously had the flair and the sizzle, and Rory and Spieth, and even Rahm had, like, a little bit of it, and he goes, Scheffler's just consistently boring, but he's just so good at golf right now.
If he was more over the top, this run that he's on would have gotten so much more attention. He is a boring golfer. The most exciting part about him is how different and quirky his game is. He does things that are unconventional. His feet are moving. He's flying off out in the air when he's swinging his driver. Like the feet never settle in one spot with it. And that's what makes him the most fun, is just that he's different in that way. But from a personality sense, and I think he seems like the nicest guy in the world. And I root for him every single week from a non-gambling perspective, because I think he's a good dude, but he doesn't necessarily move that needle for the casual person out there that's tuning into golf, where, yeah, a John Rahm, you might turn on the television and John Rahm might be cussing himself out. He might be cussing somebody out in the crowd. He might be breaking a club. And that's the opposite of the Tiger answer, where Tiger just had that flair for the dramatic, and he was able to give you, I've said this before, of anybody who's ever played any sport, I think Tiger gave you exactly what you wanted as a sports fan, and that's what made golf exciting for people. Every single time, not only did he perform and produce when the situation came, but then he gave you that Tiger roar, the Tiger fist bump. He did all of those things that got the general public being like, this guy is the greatest thing I've ever seen before. And then he backed it up by winning. And that's what makes it so challenging, is that personality wise, like, you kind of have to be the complete package to get people super excited. And that would be more so where I would say, I don't know if there's anybody out there that can match that level with it.
Well, Spencer, I feel better informed after talking to you about golf. I don't know, though, when I decide to put in my bet so that I can have a sweat, I don't know if I can get off the Jordan Spieth roller coaster, because I need the adrenaline fill. But I am going to consider some of the names you mentioned today in today's podcast. I want to thank you, man.
I really appreciate you having me on. As I said at the beginning of the show, keep doing what you're doing. Everybody out there could use a show like this to become a better at the end of the day. So I really appreciate you having me on, man.
I appreciate it. That's Spencer Aguiar, pro bettor, senior PGA analyst for Rotoballer, co-host of the Better Golf Pod, and award-winning golf writer. And this has been 90 Degrees. Hey, that's it for me. Another edition of 90 Degrees is in the books. I want to thank my guest, Spencer Aguiar, pro bettor, senior PGA analyst for Rotoballer, co-host of the Better Golf Pod, and award-winning golf writer. I want to thank the sponsors of this show, Pinnacle and BetStamp. And I want to give thanks to my producer, Jason Cooper. Thanks for listening. Do me a favor before you go. Like the content, subscribe, share, comment. We'll be back next week with another guest on the 90 Degrees podcast, where we take an inside look into the sports betting industry. That's it for me. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time.